Dear colleagues, dear friends, for those who do not know this colloquium, it has been initiated by the newly formed Global Portable XRF Network and the European Academy of Science and Arts in Salzburg. The brain and the concept behind this main core of this pXRF is Dr. Michaela Schauer in Vienna, who is not present this evening due to the academic engagement at Munich, replaced by our assistant PhD candidate Keelie from Barcelona, Spain. The Academy has already launched with success the colloquium Arts Meets Science for the last 4 years, and also has formed an expert group of members of STEM in Arts and Culture, STEMAC. We promote interdisciplinarity amongst our 7 classes of different disciplines. Hence, led by the network and endorsed by the European Academy and STEMAC expert group, we are organizing a series of online colloquia to explore the use of portable XRF in archaeology and cultural heritage. The colloquia aim to provide a platform for knowledge exchange featuring expert presentations from both the natural sciences and the humanities. The recordings of the colloquia will be available, and participants also, speakers, can submit case study reviews for publication in our official Journal of the Academy, Proceedings of the European Academy of Science and Arts. I'm glad to see present our president of the Academy, Professor Klaus Meinzer, newly re-elected, in fact, for the next 5 years. Once more, congratulations, dear Klaus. And it would be an honor if you could wish to greet this evening's colloquium.
Yeah, thank you, Ioannis. And to make a long story short, because Ioannis already mentioned the essential points, and I greet Ioannis as the upcoming vice president of our academy. But that presidency will start, as you perhaps know, in November. That means we are now still in the old presidency until 23rd of November. And so I'm the old president, and Ioannis is still dean of class 4. Anyway, as he already explained, this new series of events is in the continuation of Science Meets Arts, which was also initiated by Ioannis and Violetta Denescu. And now, as he already mentioned, it is continued in the direction of STEM. That means actually a connection of cultural studies and humanities with the natural sciences or with technologies on the basis of natural sciences, and actually the technologies which are needed to analyze archaeology. And so from a European point of view, it is an event series which aims at the identity of Europe. And you know, Europe is now in a situation we must reinvent ourselves. And so that is a very important initiative now of our academy to analyze with methods of modern technology the European heritage. And by the way, that will continue in cooperation with the EU. In 2 weeks, I will be in Brussels, and there is a very important event, a declaration concerning the so-called STS. STS means Science Technology Studies. Together, that's an international activity together with a think tank of the European Parliament, that is the STOA initiative, that means Science and Technology Option Assessment, and a think tank of the European Parliament, and they are all on the line to analyze and to determine the European identity and the European activities in innovation, and that all started in antiquity, in the European origin. And so I'm very happy that we here in the Academy are exactly on that line. And this evening there will be two very exciting events and papers, and as president, but also as scientist, I'm eager to learn more this evening. That's my experience from the last event. I am always here a learner because archaeology, that is not my field, but it concerns our European identity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Klaus, for your steady support. Let's start with our first speaker, invited speaker, which is Professor Robert Tykot, with the title Up-to-Date Assessment of Non-Destructive pXRF Analysis of Obsidian in the Mediterranean. Robert is a professor in the Department of Anthropology at the University of South Florida and director of the Laboratory for Archaeological Science and Technology and founder as well. In the Mediterranean, he has a lot of experience. He has done extensive field and laboratory research on obsidian sources and trade during the Neolithic, prehistory generally, Neolithic and Bronze Age, as well as studies on other archaeomaterials like ceramics, copper-based metals, marble, and diet and mobility as well. So he has covered, most of the archaeological science field. He has published many articles in well-known journals. He has actually online website that each one can see, his CV. We have said all this information in our announcement. So it is a very great honor to have Robert, which is an old friend, more than 20 years. First time we had met in Delphi, actually. I invite Robert, you to the platform, if you could start.
Okay, let's get this working right here. So I'm going to share, and I always forget which one of these options to choose. Let's try this one, share.
Yes.
Okay, can you see the PowerPoint?
Yes, now.
Okay, good. And that'll hopefully disappear in the front there. Okay, so I know that you all know about portable XRF machines and being non-destructive and so on, and that's what the whole focus is here. But of course, I have to give some background. I've been working on Obsidian for more than 40 years now, and so over time, I've used quite a variety of different instruments. And let's see, I can, okay. And we know that there are not that many obsidian sources, certainly in the entire Mediterranean, European part of the world. And that in itself makes it relatively easy to identify by analyzing artifacts where they're coming from. And so I'm going to just talk about those in the Central Mediterranean. We're going to hear another presentation afterwards about the Eastern Mediterranean and talk about the pXRF and some of the work that I've been working on for quite some time. Historically speaking, in the Central Mediterranean, obsidian was not used at all prior to the Neolithic time period, which is when we first had domesticated plants and animals, pottery, and year-round settlements. The obsidian sources, of course, are older than that, but simply they were not being used. And that does not have to do with being only on island sources either. I'm going to show that map in a moment, because there were people living near these sources back in the Mesolithic time periods. So, okay, moving along here. So now you can see in all of this broad region, there's not that many Obsidian sources. The only ones that are on the mainland are the Carpathian groups, and it really turns out that only the Carpathian 1 source was actually used. I'm not going to be talking about that further today. Sardinia is a very large island, something like, I think, 25,000 square kilometers or whatever, basically the same size as Sicily. Lipari, though, is a tiny island. Palmarola is less than a kilometer in size, and Pantelleria is somewhat in between. One of the things that's important is to consider when we're talking about trade and so on, are there people that are living where these geological sources are, or do you have visitors? In the case of Sardinia, there were plenty of people living there, and I will get into further detail about that in a moment. In the case of Palmarola, we have no evidence of anybody ever living there year-round, no fresh water sources. However, it was not too far from the peninsular part of Italy, and people were definitely visiting there on a regular basis. Lipari has people, archaeological sites there that do go back to the Neolithic time period, whereas for Pantelleria, it seems that the earliest residents were only about 3000 BC or thereabouts. Going back in time, that is modern time, when studies of archaeology began, we found obsidian at many, many archaeological sites around the central Mediterranean. I'm not even showing the dots for the Aegean here. I'm not showing the dots on Sardinia because it would totally cover the whole island. But because we have multiple possible sources that the obsidian came from, this is why doing some kind of analysis it turns out to be very useful. This is only 30 years ago that Alwyn Williams-Thorpe published an article in Archaeometry kind of summarizing the work that had been done at that point. But in fact, it really was not that up to date, and we have certainly gone through quite a lot of changes since then. Focusing on the central Mediterranean part, you can see that she's showing a rather small distribution of the Sardinian obsidian and the Pontine Island, which is the Palmarola group, but kind of has longer lines for the Lipari group, going from Lipari down to Malta, to southern France, and so on. Anyway, this is 30 years ago, and it's not up to date. Okay. I did my dissertation work on the Monte Arci geological source in Sardinia, starting back in the 1980s. And you can see on the right side the different outcrops and places in this mountain complex that is Monte Arci. And what I found, as you can see, having the different groups, Sardinia A, B1, B2, C1, C2 in the key, that we can actually go and distinguish these chemically, not just geographically. Back then, the work that I was, the method that I was using was an electron microscope, so looking at major elements and being minimally destructive, putting 15 to 18 samples on a very small disk into the machine, being able to analyze 4 or 5 samples every hour or so, multiple spots, and so on. I'm not going to get into further detail, but these major elements, major and minor elements, were sufficient in distinguishing between the different Monte Arci subgroups. And what I found at an archaeological site, the Filiestru Cave, that there was a change over time from the early Neolithic, the Cardial and Pressware time, up to the Ozieri, late Neolithic time, a change in which of the Monte Arci subgroups were being used, with the SC group becoming the dominant one by that time. I then went and did the same thing on a bunch of other archaeological sites in Sardinia, in Corsica, and the archipelago that connects to mainland Italy. And you can see here a bunch of these sites for the early Neolithic period are using those three different groups. I'll just call them A, B, and C. You get to mainland Italy, and we also have coming from Lipari and Palmarola. But just looking at the Sardinia and Corsica ones, you see that. We now jump to the late Neolithic, and you can easily see that the Sardinian B group in the yellow is hardly used at all, and is not because they ran out, that they used up all of the obsidian, but what I go and interpret is that there was a change by the late Neolithic of people who had the access to the sources, that is, that there was control of certain territories. And as we will see in different parts of Sardinia, in particular where the Sardinian C group is, was a major production site that was developed by that time. I'm also showing here the far away groups, places in southern France and Corsica, where you can see in red that the Sardinian A subsource was the main one being used there in southern France. And that was not the case that was going on in Sardinia. And so this brought up a range of other questions about the selection of different sources or subsources when you had more than one available, because we really don't see this going on elsewhere. Okay, moving forward in time a little bit now into the early 1990s. Is that right? No, sorry, jumping to 2000 or so. I did the same kind of geological survey on Lipari, collecting samples up and down places where obsidian was. Some things to make clear is that if you ever visit Lipari today, that there have been more historic eruptions of obsidian, which has gone and covered over much of the obsidian that was available back in the Neolithic time period. But I'm standing by some here, and along some of the coast, there are loose pieces that have eroded and so on. But we have basically two ancient geological groups, the Gabalato Gorge one, which is over here, and then we also have I can't think right now, but a very minor a source that was, however, used. It did produce good quality obsidian. On that tiny island of Palmarola, most of the obsidian in C2 and so on is in the northern part. The slide here, the picture is rotated. You can see on the right, I'm pointing again, we call that the Monte Tramontana area, and there is plenty of obsidian, not in as large blocks as you would find in Sardinia, but nevertheless large enough to be making stone tools. Important is that in the southeast corner, Punta Vardella, there's actually two small source groups there that can be chemically distinguished from the one that's only a kilometer or so away. That doesn't seem to be important, archaeologically speaking, because there was no control in terms of the access to these different places. And based on the analyses that have been done on artifacts, they all seem to be coming from the northern part of Palmarola. Pantelleria, to the south of Sicily, also has multiple source locations. Unlike in Sardinia, where it's one volcanic complex, in Pantelleria, we have one complex that's called Balata de Turkey in the southern part, and then there's also two eruptions near the Lago de Venere up here to the north, and the Gelkamar region as well. You can also see in terms of access to the sources that on the southern cliff face, this black line or lines running across are two of those subsources. In the one case, it does go and erode down here so that access was at the water level, but somewhere. Didn't I have a picture of this? No. But when we did our geological survey, we wanted to make sure that we were getting in situ samples. So one of my students was on a rope going down the cliffside quite a bit to collect obsidian from some of the places that were not available elsewhere. Okay. We all know about doing a neutron activation analysis since the 1970s or so. This has been very useful on obsidian. It is destructive, however, and I'm not going to deal with the methods and so on here. But just to say that collecting geological samples, I had the analyses done by NAA, ICP-MS, a regular XRF machine, and the microprobe, and of course now the portable XRF machines as well. Here you can see Mike Glasscock and colleagues there, where we were also doing laser ablation ICP-MS. All of these methods are technically destructive to artifacts, and this, of course, is why using pXRF is very different from that, and that is what has allowed me to go and analyze so many samples. In the case of Palmarola, as I mentioned, we can go and distinguish using a bunch of the trace elements that we get, can distinguish 3 different groups there, but I really think it's the Panta Vardella that is the one that was really being used. Okay, for Pantelleria, just looking at some particular trace elements here, we've got the whole Balata Turkey group in the one part, and the Lago de Venere part in the lower left, but then we have 3 different parts for those different formation layers at Balata Turkey as well. Is this important to be able to distinguish to this kind of precision or not? I bring this up because with the portable XRF, I cannot distinguish the different Balata Turkey subsources there, but I can tell Balata Turkey from the Lago de Venere groups and so on, and I cannot distinguish at all for the Palmarola subsources. Anyway, I've been using portable XRF now for nearly 20 years. These are handheld kinds that I've had, starting with the Bruker 3-5 Plus. I currently have the Tracer. You can see that in front of my face on the right or whatever. And it's truly handheld. I've never gone even, and of course I'm bringing it to Europe on various airlines and so on. I never even check this in a bag. I just have it in a backpack as one of my carry-ons. And that makes the facility of doing these analyses such a great thing. And you can see some of the numbers up until a few years ago. 1994, when that article came out, the total number of analyses done in the entire Central Mediterranean was less than 1,000. Whereas starting when I got into doing things not with the portable XRF, it went up. I'm sorry, not with the portable XRF, but doing small samples on the microprobe. We got up to about 3,000. But since then, the numbers have gone up, and this is even more so that we're getting pretty close to 20,000 total analyses in the Central Mediterranean. And just a basic graph on the right side here, showing that we can easily distinguish visually, as well as looking at the calibrated numeric values between the different sources, looking at just a few of those trace elements, rubidium, strontium, zirconium, and so on. And you can see that on the graph here as well, looking at just 3 of these trace elements. We can certainly put off Milos and Carpathian sources from the Central Mediterranean groups. Pantelleria, I didn't mention, is a totally different composition kind of obsidian, and so it easily stands out. And you can see here the Sardinian subsources as well as Lipari and Palmarola. And just looking at these sources individually, again, just using a few trace elements to distinguish the Monte Archi subgroups on the left For Lipari, we can easily distinguish between Gabellato and Canetodentro, and for Pantelleria, between the Bellato de Turkey in the red, and then the two different Lago de Venere groups there in the lower left. Okay. So, more than 19,500 obsidian artifacts, to my knowledge, have been analyzed, published by others, and so on here in the Central Mediterranean. And combining this data compared with what her name, Williamsthorpe, had 30 years ago, we can talk a whole lot more about the archaeological perspective, what has changed over time, what distances are involved. We can even talk about the actual maritime routes that were going from Sardinia to the mainland and so on. And let me get onto this. Looking first at 4 islands there in the northern part of the Tyrrhenian, starting with Capraia over here. You can see that most of the obsidian is from Sardinia, but there is some from Palmarola and also Lipari as well. The dominant subsource is the Sardinian Sea group. This is not from an excavation, so we can't say whether it's early Neolithic or middle or late Neolithic. For Pianosa, they have done excavations there, and most of this is early Neolithic, and we have pretty much an equal amount of the Sardinian A, B, and C, and the tiny bit coming from Palmarola and Lipari. Then we head to Giglio, which is also excavated in an early Neolithic site, and it's totally dominated by the Palmarola obsidian. And Genutri, not from an excavation, but very close to Giglio, has a mix of the Sardinian and also small amounts of the Palmarola and Lipari. How do we go and interpret the difference that we observe here between these 4 island groups? Let's just say that at Giglio, which is definitely early Neolithic, that it's it's dominated by the Palmarola obsidian. It's also the closest of any of those 4 sources to Palmarola. How did the obsidian get there? Well, it certainly was some kind of maritime travel, but it's all along the coastline, so not a dangerous cross-water kinds of things. The case of Capraia is the closest one of any of these to Corsica and therefore to Sardinia. And I argue that for traveling over water, going the shortest open water distances was probably very important. And in order to go from Corsica and Sardinia to the mainland, Capraia could very well have been one of the first stops going on there. And so it having mostly Sardinian obsidian is no surprise. If there was travel in the opposite direction from mainland Italy or the eastern part to Corsica, there's no reason that people would have stopped in Capraia to go there because it's so close to Corsica. Instead, they would have been coming from Pianosa or possibly from one of the other islands in there. So in the case, again, or the opposite case at Giglio, which is close to mainland Italy, there's no reason that coming from Sardinia that they would go directly to Giglio and then to the mainland compared with going through Capraia or Pianosa. So making some of these interpretations, of course, having actual excavated material from all 4 of these sites would help chronologically looking at that. But now going on to the mainland, we can look at some of those changes over time from excavations and so on. So we have for Pasquale, well inland in the northern part of Italy, dating to the, the 5th, early 4th millennium BC. We've analyzed a large number of artifacts, and you can see that we are dominated by the Sardinian A group and then by the Sardinian C group, very little in terms of the Sardinian B. There's hardly anything coming from Palmarola. I think there were, 2 pieces or something out of the 900 that were done. And then we have the Lipari obsidian. So this strongly suggests that the distribution patterns were not set in stone, so to speak, but represent the socioeconomic system of the Neolithic. And what you don't see on the map here are things like the Apennine Mountains and the actual directions. Once the Sardinian obsidian got to mainland Italy, how did it actually get to the places like Pescale? I'm going to now jump to these 4 islands over here, 4 not islands, 4 sites very close to each other, and look at what was going on there, not that far from Pescale and just as far inland. But before doing that, we're going to head south to Poggio Olivastro, also an inland site, fairly at the same time that we saw a moment ago for Pescale, but being further south, there's much more of the Palmarola and Lipari obsidian and far less of the Sardinian obsidian. So distance from the geological sources is playing a factor as we get further away from Sardinia and the routes that it would have taken to get from there to mainland Italy. Okay. Even further south, the site of Venafro, and also Mondragone, where again we have mostly, in the case of Mondragone, mostly Palmarola obsidian, but not that far away at the site of Venafro, it's much more Lipari. Mondragone is on the coast. Venafro is inland. And so again, you have to consider, while obsidian is initially going on a boat or raft or however it was, we have no archaeological evidence of whatever transport methods going back that far. But at the inland site, Venafro, the Lipari obsidian seems to be much more important, whereas the convenience of Palmarola on the coastline made it the dominant group there at Mondragone. One of the things that we found in the past 30 years now is that Palmarola group, unlike what was shown in that a graph from 1995, is much greater distribution than was previously thought. All the way, in a couple of cases, to Corsica, to southern France, definitely to northern Italy, even across the Adriatic to some of the islands and the mainland of Croatia over there. We found a piece of it on the island of Ustica, north of Sicily, and also something down here in Calabria. So being able to analyze a large number of artifacts allows us to go and really understand not just the main objects that were being transported, but that there was also some small numbers of things that were, let's say, irregularly transported over such great distances. Obsidian has been found now at a whole bunch of these islands in the Adriatic and also in Croatia and up in the Istria part of Croatia as well, and not just a few pieces at many of these sites. On that island of Palagruja, smack in the middle of the Adriatic Sea, we don't have evidence of people living there because it is such a tiny island, but we do have, based on the archaeological site, there dating to the end of the 4th millennium or so BC. This was a big surprise, not that most of them were coming from Lipari, but 4 all came from Milos in the Aegean. And all 4 of those are from the Stanikia subgroup there. And so you can see those 4 pieces on Palagruja. Okay, even further south into Calabria. We've analyzed this from a bunch of archaeological sites, and I'm pointing out this one called Saracena. The other sites are pretty much all along the coast other than Tiriolo, and this is simply because this is where obsidian has been found. It does not mean that nobody was living in some of these open places, but the fact is that there are not prehistoric sites that have been found and excavated there yet. So it seems that certain areas of this part of Italy, there was selection of certain geological, locale kinds of places where rivers were, et cetera, et cetera. We always have to keep this in mind. But just remember the location of Saracena and also Tiriolo being inland. Saracena is also high elevation place, and where the excavation was in a cave, and nice stratigraphic layers going back from the Mesolithic through the Bronze Age and so on. A nice arrowhead and mostly blades. One of the things compared, let's say, with chert samples, obsidian is rarely treated with a retouch. It seems that obsidian was used for a short length of time and then disposed of, and this is throughout the central Mediterranean. For the Saracena site, a large number of artifacts were analyzed, most of them coming from Lipari, from the Gabalotto subsource, one piece from Caneto Dentro, but we also have 3 pieces coming from Palmarola and 4 from Sardinia, and they represent 2 of the different subgroups for Sardinia. Looking at this chronologically, all 3 of the Palmarola groups are from the early Neolithic time, whereas all of the Sardinian ones are from the middle Neolithic time. And this seems to be the case in general for the distribution of Sardinian obsidian to mainland Italy was far more done in the middle Neolithic, very little in the early Neolithic. And so again, this has to do with the increasing complexity of the societies that were in the early Neolithic compared with the middle Neolithic and so on. So these changes in time. Statistically, this could not, be proven, but it seems that Palmarola obsidian was much more important in relatively local distances early on, but later on, it's the Sardinian and the Lipari obsidian which comes to dominate things. Sardinian obsidian has also been identified now, not just in the northern part, as I was showing here, or in southern France, but all of these red dots are places now where Sardinian obsidian has been found, some even on the east coast, on the Adriatic side of southern Italy, but all the way down at Bova Marina, and also even a piece in western Sicily. And considering, again, compared with Palmarola and Lipari, I already showed a map, Palmarola being widely distributed north and south, and Lipari as well, and perhaps even further distances traveled in that case. But the small numbers that are reaching so far away is, you kind of think on one of the boats and the kind of society that existed there in the Neolithic time period. They were not going and loading a boat with 10,000 pieces of obsidian artifacts and traveling some kind of great distance. There were many different kinds of materials being traded at the same time. Of course, things that are no longer preserved, like food, clothes, stuff like that, pottery, and so on. And so yes, some pieces of obsidian made it over that great distance, what we call a down the line kind of trade. It was not the same boat vessel either that was going from Sardinia, where there's of course first distance from the inland Monte Arci area to the coast, but instead going from, maybe in the same boat, going from Monte Arci to Corsica, maybe to this part of northern Italy, but being in multiple vessels, multiple trade segments by the time you're getting down this far into southern Italy and Sicily. Okay, looking at Pantelleria here and its distribution. No surprise that the nearest part of Sicily, that is the western part, has the greater percentages. But you also have Lipari just to the north, a smaller, much smaller open water distance to get to mainland Sicily, mainland, whatever, technically it's an island. And you can just see that while it's 100% Pantelleria, they're on Pantelleria, and also as an aside, on the island of Zembra, and Hergla and Lampedusa down here, that you get to the mainland of Sicily, and most is still coming from Lipari. As we head from the western part of Sicily to the eastern part of Sicily, Pantelleria becomes a very low percent, 1 or 2%. In all of these cases for those 5 sites there, we're whatever, less than 10% at this one here. And Milena, there is maybe 25% or so. And so if you remember from a previous one, I showed that we have one piece actually in Calabria. So definitely down the line exchange and Lipari dominating what was going on there. Okay. Ustica is a very small island north of Palermo there in the middle of the Tyrrhenian. We knew that people were living there back in the Bronze Age because of an excavation that was done there. However, we have found in the last 10 or so years more than a dozen sites where we have archaeological, we have obsidian finds, and a couple of these have been excavated. But the ceramics found with them show that they were regularly visiting Ustica going back into the Neolithic time period, and not just the Bronze Age at the Faraglione site that's there as well. So coming up now with kind of potential trade routes. Ustica, again, is a great distance of open water wherever you're coming from. Coming the shortest distance from near Palermo over here, I've just kind of drawn these lines, but we have Obsidian coming from Lipari and coming from Pantelleria. Starting with the Pantelleria Obsidian, they first had to go definitely over something like at least 80 open water kilometers to get to the southern part of Sicily. Maybe they went around here, and then another at least 60 or so kilometers to get to Ustica. The Lipari Obsidian could have gone the shortest open water distance to the northern part of Sicily across the coast there, but then again, an open water distance of at least 50 or so kilometers there. The domination, though, of Lipari Obsidian in Ustica compared with at the site of Grotta del Uzzo, which is on the mainland part of northwestern Sicily, suggests that there was open water distance travel
Robert,
from
sorry,
Lipari to get to
you
Ustica.
are 15 minutes over.
Oh, okay. I will finish very quickly. Okay. Malta is the strangest things here. On the site of Scorba and the other two places on the island of Malta proper, compared with the Jara group in on the other island. Skip the things here, but the Brockdorf Circle is clearly a religious location, has underground burials and so on, and they do not allow any of their artifacts to be taken from Malta. So this is where a pXRF having to bring it there is the only way to conduct any kinds of analyses. And what we find there is that most of it's coming from Lipari at Scorba, but at the Brockdorf on the Gozo, it's the opposite, with 77% from Pantelleria. And again, looking at the travel routes involved here, this clearly suggests direct travel from Pantelleria over 200 kilometers to get to Gozo, compared with a much shorter distance going to mainland Sicily through eastern Sicily and then back out to Malta. We also do not find Pantelleria Obsidian there in eastern Sicily. So this is clearly what was going on there. So overall, how do we look at the trade routes and so on? They were capable of going 100 kilometers over open water to get to and from Pantelleria. But it really looks like, when possible, they stayed within the coastal areas and used the islands in the middle of the Adriatic when possible. So territorial control of Obsidian sources, not for Palmarola, certainly. Were they selecting these different sources based on what their visual or even their physical properties are, which do vary from the four island groups to some extent, we'll say. There's no direct evidence that we have of what kind of boats, because there simply are none preserved from the Neolithic time period. And centers for production, absolutely in Sardinia, at Monte Arci. This has been found. I haven't shown the excavations that I've done there, and also on Lipari as well. So we have to consider these when we are making our interpretations about trade and so on. And back to the focus on pXRF here, the portability is wonderful and simply allows a lot of studies that cannot have been done otherwise. It's a non-destructive on any size object, rapid. We're doing things typically for Obsidian, 30 seconds or even less, and it's good for many other materials as well. The disadvantage, the only ones, is that we cannot, for the research that I'm doing here, we cannot distinguish the subsources on Palmarola, but is that necessary or important, archaeologically speaking? I would say at this point, it's not. So that's it. Thank you all very much, and sorry to run over.
Thank you very much, Robert, for this extensive overview of your work for so many years concerning the Central and Western Mediterranean. This gives, your talk gives also the support of why this global portable XRF network was established. It needs a lot of work, of course, especially for the calibration, standardization of the portable instruments. And as we have seen, and we know that there are many advantages having portable XRF compared to the desktop and destructive apparatus. And I think at the end we shall make some questions. So I would like now to go on with the second speaker, Dr. Theodora Moutsiou, on prehistoric maritime connections of obsidians in Eastern Mediterranean. Dora Moutsiou is a special scientist at the Archaeological Research Unit of the University of Cyprus. She has led multiple competitive funded interdisciplinary research projects that foster strong synergies and innovation in the study of prehistoric mobility, sociality, island archaeology, and the consumption of rare raw materials, including obsidian, as a proxy of past behavior and cognition. She has an outstanding record on over 20 years of field experience, ranging from Middle Paleolithic to the Bronze Age, and from Europe to Africa and Australia, applied in mentoring the next generation of archaeologists. She is active internationally in terms of service to the scientific community, participating in key roles in scientific associations, committees, and conference organizations, and recently also has been appointed as a president of the International Association of Obsidian Studies, EASA. Dora, the platform is yours.
Okay, thank you. Before I begin my talk, you can hear me and you can see everything?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. And I want to thank everyone for being here and to the organizers for inviting me. I'm honored to be part of this event tonight. So for my talk today, I want to concentrate on the Eastern Mediterranean and to discuss social interactions between groups geographically separated by sea and the influence of such water gaps in the scale of prehistoric connectivity. So I will begin with a brief overview, very brief overview of the deep history of the region and its connection with the sea before turning my attention to the island of Cyprus to explore its maritime links to the mainland from the terminal Pleistocene until the late Aceramic Neolithic. And I will approach these topics from the lens of Obsidian, quite appropriate, obviously, and its role in the organization of prehistoric communities in the Eastern Mediterranean islandscape, particularly in the context of maritime movement, migration, and long-distance exchange and interactions. So let's see if this works. Just to position us in the region, the Eastern Mediterranean encompasses the Ionian and Aegean Seas, Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, the Near East, Levant, and the island of Cyprus, which, as I said, will be the main focus of my presentation. Now, traditional narratives of seascapes regard islands as isolated from the continent, too impoverished to have sustained hunter and gatherer populations, and landscapes to be conquered and tamed by technologically advanced human groups associated with the Neolithic lifestyle. This view of the sea as a barrier to human movement is unfortunately particularly persistent in Eastern Mediterranean prehistory, with the colonization of the region's islands commonly regarded as a Neolithic phenomenon initiated by farming populations from the mainland under demographic or environmental pressure at the start of the Holocene. Cyprus is in particular is still largely regarded as isolated from regional phenomena and largely unaffected by them due to its insularity and presumed limited ecological carrying capacity and resource availability. Archaeological evidence, however, demonstrates the presence of mobile hunter-gatherer and forager groups in multiple localities and variable habitats across the Eastern Mediterranean as early as 1.4 million years ago, including many of the modern-day Eastern Mediterranean islands. Characteristic example is Crete. Now, regarding Cyprus, the apparent lack of indigenous foragers narrative is being disproven by the documentation of several terminal Pleistocene, early Holocene archaeological sites on the island. A potential Paleolithic presence, however, of hunter-gatherer groups based on small collections of surface finds, lithics, documented during surface surveys in the 1960s to the 1980s, remain largely debatable, mainly because they come from no stratigraphic context. Although renewed research interest and targeted field surveys contribute new data in support of a probable pre-Holocene exploitation of the island, and I will return to this point later on. Now, despite clear evidence for the successful early exploitation of insular environments in the rest of the Eastern Mediterranean and other parts of the world, such as the Indo-Pacific region, as far back as 100,000 years ago, that demonstrate that the technological capacity of early humans for maritime crossings, Cyprus is persistently viewed as separated from its neighbors due to its insularity. As you can see from the map here on the right, Cyprus is an oceanic island, so it was never connected to the mainland. So let's test the validity of this narrative using Obsidian as a proxy of communication and interaction. Now, Obsidian provides tangible evidence for well-established hunter-gatherer sea networks and long-distance communication mediated by the sea, including long-distance raw material transports, commodities exchange, and even potentially shared symbolic systems. Now, the Eastern Mediterranean Obsidian sources comprise of multiple locations in continental Anatolia, the Caucasus region, and the islands of Milos, Antiparos, and Yali in the Aegean. Looking at the insular obsidian sources in particular, we note that Melian obsidian was transported to the Greek mainland as early as 15,000 years ago via open water crossings of at least 20 kilometers. Now, although obsidian transports in the region are mostly recorded in the Neolithic, pre-Neolithic sea travel to islands by fisher and forager populations has also been attested on islands in the North Aegean, such as Jura, Alonissos, and Skyros, Central Aegean, like Ikaria, and the Southern Aegean, where most likely Yali and Milos obsidian has been transported to the islands over a distance of approximately 100 kilometers, thus demonstrating active maritime networks by hunter-gatherer populations in the Aegean, at least from at least the lower Mesolithic. Now, back to Cyprus. Archaeological sites with hunter-gatherer characteristics are still very few. Acroteria Aetokrenos, down here, and photo here, is currently the oldest securely dated such site, dating to around 12,000 years ago. It demonstrates that hunter-gatherers were certainly on the southern coast of the island during the terminal Pleistocene, at least ephemerally. Sites dating to the terminal Pleistocene, essentially Acroteria Aetokrenos, do not exhibit material evidence for obsidian exploitation, contrary to what we noted in the Aegean. In fact, the earliest so far exploitation of obsidian on Cyprus is associated with the initial Aceramic Neolithic, so the very start of the early Holocene, a period characterized by sites with mixed economies. Only two such sites are actually known from the island, Agios Tichonas Klimonas and Agia Varvara as Prokremnos. These first permanent settlements saw evidence for hunting, combined with plant cultivation and modest consumption of marine foods, dating to around 10,000 years ago. At this time, obsidian use is very limited, and it's so far recorded only on Klimonas, 3 or 4 pieces. Obsidian consumption increases in the early Aceramic Neolithic, alongside a settlement expansion in the Middle Holocene at around 8,000 years ago. Following that, obsidian exploitation declines from the late Aceramic Neolithic onwards. To date, there is no evidence for core production on the island, and the strong technological parallels with obsidian implements from the Near East, in association with their minute quantities, suggest that the obsidian artifacts found on Cyprus were manufactured offshore and subsequently introduced to the island in finished form. Now, albeit few, these early sites mentioned above, the ones with the mixed economies, showcase that mobile hunter-gatherer groups were successful at organizing a sustainable life on the island. And a newly discovered archaeological site comes to add to the discussion of early human adaptation to insular environments at presumed marginal landscapes. Drusa's Klinikia, you can see here, was discovered in April 2022 as a result of systematic field survey conducted by me in collaboration with Dr. Rippmeyer of the German Archaeological Institute. The research focus was on the peninsula of Akamas, the westernmost part of Cyprus, an area so far void of archaeological evidence for early human exploitation. A systematic surface material collection and pilot test trends resulted in the documentation of a large lithic assemblage pointing to an epipaleolithic ceramic Neolithic occupation, confirming the significance of the discoveries and the location. So we had to go back. In 2024, we conducted a systematic geophysical survey and initiated the Colloquia excavation program. So the excavation of so far 5 1x1 meter squares in 3 trenches, I hope you can see them here, resulted in the documentation of a rich and diverse material collection, including charcoal, lithics, bone, and shell. Now, C14 dating on charcoal samples collected from the pilot trends at a depth of around 30 centimeters provides a preliminary date of around 8,200 calibrated years before BP. Considering that in the 2024 excavation, we were able to reach a depth of approximately 60 centimeters without reaching bedrock yet, we expect our stratigraphic sequence to generate even earlier dates once material analysis is completed. We have a large lithic assemblage with typotechnological characteristics of an epipaleolithic initial ceramic Neolithic period. And I show here 2 diagnostic examples of a lunate and an arrowhead that support an early hunter-gatherer presence. Now, returning to Obsidian, we also recovered 14 Obsidian artifacts from the site. They're all fragments of bladelets, raising exciting questions about mobile communities' insular adaptation and their social organization skills. Now, as we said, Colloquia is located at the westernmost sector of Cyprus, commonly viewed through modern eyes as the wild part of the island. The Akamas Peninsula is often described as a desolate landscape, giving connotations of desertedness, emptiness, and gloom, a place that would have presumably been avoided by pioneer colonists. Now, the material evidence for the consumption of obsidian in the area, such an unexpected locality, requires us to consider what this means for these early settlers' cognitive and behavioral abilities regarding maritime movement, coastal adaptation, and long-distance interactions. Now, obsidian is a non-native raw material to Cyprus, and thus it provides direct material evidence for tracking long-distance maritime links with the broader region. Geochemical analysis of entire obsidian assemblages using the fantastic handheld portable XRF equipment determined that the majority of the artifacts are sourced to the central Anatolian volcanic complex of Golu Dag, with a lesser amount to Nenezi Dag, also in central Anatolia, and a couple of examples from the eastern Anatolian shores of Bengal B. Now, the Colloquia obsidian artifacts are also fingerprinted to the Golu Dag complex, following the patterns that we observed for the other ceramic Neolithic obsidian assemblages from the island. Now, the provenance of these exotics to various sources in the mainland demonstrate long-distance maritime networks of material exchange and communication, highlighted by close parallels in obsidian exploitation between Cyprus and stone tool making in Anatolia and the Near East. As an oceanic island, Cyprus will have only been approachable via open water sea crossings. And some modeling efforts of drift-induced seaborne movement indicate that most successful drifts into Cyprus leave from present-day Turkey, with 2 locations in northern Levant, that being modern-day Syria, also providing favorable departure regions during winter and fall. Now, no early Holocene archaeological sites are known in that area of Turkey, although there are some epipaleolithic sites. So any physical connectivity should not necessarily be interpreted as archaeological connectivity. Again, this might be attributed to such sites being currently submerged due to the sea level rise since the early Holocene. However, Anatolian obsidian is widely distributed across Southwest Asia. You can see the two maps on the right, and it is not unreasonable to hypothesize that some of the distributed obsidian made its way to Cyprus, also via the Levant. Now, long-distance travel is risky, time and effort-consuming, and requires substantial advanced planning, especially where the sea is involved. Therefore, from a cost-effective perspective, the benefits associated with such an undertaking must outweigh these cognitive and organizational costs, which raises the question as to why did these early communities choose to get involved in the long-distance exchange of obsidian. Now, ethnographic and archaeological records around the globe are full of examples of people moving not only for subsistence purposes, but also for reasons of social contact, including the establishment of new social ties or the reaffirmation of existing ones. I argue then that in early Cyprus, the exchange of obsidian tools was an activity performed for the negotiation of social relations at a time of considerable climatic and societal change. Now, the small quantities of obsidian artifacts found on Cyprus, we're talking maybe 20, 10, 5 pieces per site, in connection with the preferential exchange of obsidian tools, despite the local availability of really good quality chert, suggests that the obsidian artifacts were invested with meaning that was not simply utilitarian. The arrival in a new territory and the effort to establish a new community may be viewed as occasions when group identity and communal agency are particularly important. Moving to Cyprus, these new individuals and households faced the particular challenge of identifying themselves as members of a group in order to indicate legitimate participation in community approaches to environmental or social stress, where being a member simultaneously of different social groups increased opportunities for survival. Now, sophisticated information crucial to the operation of a society can be conveyed even through the distribution of everyday objects like stone tools. This is so because in social transactions, the value of portable resources is closely connected to the individuals who perform those actions. So along with the processes of manufacturing, handling, and transporting them, artifacts acquire agency by taking on the properties of the individuals as social actors. The materiality of the objects themselves influences their value as well as the scale and patterns of their circulation. Objects made of materials that stand out are more efficient in creating and maintaining social relations than items that do not share distinctive physical qualities. In fact, certain visual material qualities heightens human sensory responses because they affect the way they are perceived by the human brain, with some classes of objects attracting a lot more attention and respect than others. So the ability to reflect light, color, and brilliance have actually been found to be aesthetically satisfying and in certain societies even spiritually charged with power. This innate attraction to objects that are colorful, sparkle, shine, or transmit light appear to elicit aesthetic and emotional responses that transcend cultural or chronological boundaries. So material objects are active agents in the maintenance of complex social relations that enable individuals to communicate without the necessity of face-to-face interactions. and to overcome otherwise inconceivable distances. So the selected stones' unique aesthetic properties imbued the chosen material, that being obsidian, with a symbolic power that extended across land and the sea. So the symbolic role of the obsidian artifacts found on Cyprus is linked, I would argue, to their ability to entangle communities and individuals in emotional bonds, either kinship or alliance relationships that could be maintained at a distance. They functioned then as a symbol of relatedness and a powerful medium for those early Cypriot communities' social strategies and negotiations within the changing Mediterranean world, possibly even as a buffer against resource stress and the risks associated with frontier colonization. Now, once on the island, obsidian is distributed across the insular landscape, mainly along distinct coastal pathways. The absence of obsidian, the yellow dots are sites with no obsidian. So the absence of obsidian from the interior of the island is not adequately explained purely in... Shall I stop?
No, go on. Somebody has, okay.
I'm almost done anyway.
Yeah, go on, don't worry.
Okay, so the lack of obsidian from the interior sites is not adequately explained in subsistence terms. So notwithstanding the potential influence of accessibility bias due to sea level rise and inundation of favorable late Pleistocene, early Holocene migration and habitation places, the scarcity of inland sites consuming obsidian may suggest that these early obsidian-bearing populations that we see along the coast predominantly exhibited advanced coastal adaptation skills that help them establish themselves on the new territory. Now, the archaeological record of early Cyprus provides evidence for an active interest on behalf of these early settlers towards a continued two-way interaction with continental communities within the broader Eastern Mediterranean social sphere. This interpretation implies that different Neolithic groups crossed to Cyprus for a variety of reasons, rather than just an exclusive goal of sedentary farming. And as an example, Cyprus could have been used for intensive resource exploitation, including pigments. Chipstone, as I said, chert is of great quality, or picrolite, ideal for bead making, or even perishable resources such as salt, seaweed, fish, shellfish, even marine avifauna that lay near or beyond the shore. A broad and diverse array of archaeological evidence from the Middle Holocene, so from the later Ceramic Neolithic, indicates that the Cypriot communities had not only adapted to a new insular way of life, but they also maintained some level of overseas contacts, as seen in the continuing consumption of exotic raw materials. One of them is obsidian, as well as special categories of objects, such as the characteristic incised decorated dentalium cells that showcase not only continuing maritime contacts with the continent, but also perhaps a shared symbolic or referential world. And this is my last slide. Islands in the Mediterranean are still largely described as desolate landscapes, landscapes without people, in a state of bleak and dismal emptiness, quite poetic, at least during their earliest prehistory. Now, using the example of Cyprus and the newly discovered Colloquia site and Obsidian, while the hinterland of the Akamas Peninsula can be construed as desolate. Regarding human presence at the start of the Holocene, Colloquia demonstrates that not only were mobile human groups exploiting the area, but also that a connection existed with other groups inhabiting the island. The consumption of obsidian at several sites across the island demonstrates an ongoing communication and connectivity, both locally and at greater distances, among newly established insular communities and beyond. Involvement in the coastal domain enabled these early groups to expand their habitats, giving them access to new resources, material and social, which ultimately led to the creation of a regional maritime interaction sphere. In this context, the Mediterranean Sea facilitated these interactions, enabling hunter-gatherer, mixed and agropastoral communities alike to entangle themselves in an enduring web of social relationships that extended across the sea. And this is the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Dora, very much for this illuminating lecture. And your very recent data you have and the interpretation you have made regarding the mobility, human mobility in prehistoric times in Eastern Mediterranean, focused on Cyprus. Thank you very much. It was an honor for me and first time to meet you as well. Thank you for accepting our invitation.
The honor is all mine.
Thank you. I would like to ask now any questions for the first speaker, for Robert Tykot.
Questions from
I want to give my sign, but anyway, it doesn't work here. May I ask a question?
Yes. Yes, of course.
It is actually a question to both, and I want to come back to my remark in the beginning concerning the European identity. And therefore, especially under the impression of the last talk, the question to you is, did you also compare this pattern of your foundings with other non-European cultures, for example, in Africa or in Asia? And is there a difference, or in this prehistoric period, are the behaviors of humans, prehistoric humans, similar?
May I start?
Yeah, perhaps.
Thank you for the question. I actually did my PhD in the Paleolithic use of obsidian, and I looked at Africa and Near East and Central European obsidian sources and the distances of movement throughout the Pleistocene. And what I found is that even in East Africa, with sites dating to 1 million years ago, 500,000 years ago, there are instances where humans preferentially choose which obsidian source they're going to exploit, and it's not always the one that's near them. So I don't remember the names now of the sites, but I had occasions where people were sitting on an obsidian source. Nevertheless, they chose to exploit material from a source 20, 30, 100 kilometers away, which is very interesting. And I observed that in all the regions that I looked into. So, yeah.
Very interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
So there is no globalization in our sense, but anyway, a common level that is very interesting, a common level of mankind in that period, and not these big differences which we later on observed, even since antiquity and the first high cultures.
Okay, Robert, do you want to say anything, Robert?
Well, it's very interesting in the Central Mediterranean that the obsidian was not used prior to the Neolithic, even though they had the maritime capabilities. We have archaeological sites on islands like Sardinia, and so it's just hard to really say why there is that difference between there and in the Aegean and so on.
But Rob, excuse me, were the obsidian sources in central Mediterranean old enough, geologically speaking? I can't remember.
Yes, in Sardinia it goes back 5 million years. It's only the Lipari ones which were formed in the Mesolithic.
Mhm. By the way, that was very amazing for me to have in the first talk this intensive information concerning Sardinia, because in 1 week I will go to the University of Cagliari and I will meet my colleagues there. And now I have a deep prehistorical background of this country. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Luisa Delay. Luisa.
Yes, yes. First of all, can you hear me? Because
Yes, I can,
yes,
I can.
I'm in a strange environment at the moment. First of all, thank you very much to both the scientists, our colleagues, because both were very interesting talks to me. And I have a couple of questions or doubts for Robert, simply because I know Italy much better than the other environment that has been described. So clearly my questions go to Robert for this reason. I was just wondering if you have, if you had any evidence of obsidian exchanges and use on the main of the archipelagus island that you have described, that is Elba, near the Tuscan islands that you were pointing on. So I was just wondering, because Elba is in the middle of is a crossroad basically for all the exchanges in those times. So I was just wondering how Elba was involved and if it was, at what extent, in what sources. And the other question is just a doubt that I have. You were comparing two southern islands, Giglio and Giannutri, in terms of different sources. Now, Giglio and Giannutri are really close to each other. And if I did it right, get it right, they were completely different in terms of sources, aren't they? So one is from Palmarola, more or less completely, and the other one is from Sardinia. So I was wondering why this huge difference in two islands that are really, really, really close to each other. This is it's just a doubt, and it was very interesting. Thank you very much.
Regarding Elba, there simply have not been any Neolithic sites found there. That does not mean that Neolithic people were not going through there or whatever, but it's not that big an island, and with everything modern that's covering things over. So we just don't know about Elba. Regarding those two islands, we know that Giglio is early Neolithic because that came from excavations. And it seems that because Palmarola would have been the closest, no surprise in the earliest time period that was the major source. For the other island, we don't know the time period because these were just, and so there may have been that change to the Middle Neolithic like we saw elsewhere.
Right, right, that makes sense. Thank you very much.
Sure, Luisa. That's it.
Anybody, anyone else for a question to both our speakers? Yes, Catherine Snyder.
Yes, hello. Good evening.
Hello.
Thank you very much. I try to, yes.
Okay,
hi.
we see you.
Thank you to both speakers. This was very interesting for me to hear. And I have one question, one more analytical question to Robert. You said you weren't able to distinguish the two Palmarola groups by pXRF. Was this because the elemental composition is too similar, or which reasons did this have?
The simple reason is that the trace elements that we can detect with the pXRF do not distinguish those groups, and we would need other, more data that we certainly get from ICP or NAA.
Which data would that be, just for me as an
With the pXRF, we're getting rubidium, strontium, yttrium, niobium, and zirconium. And so there's a whole bunch of other elements that can be used to distinguish those.
Trace, mostly trace elements.
Oh, yes, definitely trace elements.
Did you try to look at the spectra and see if you can find these elements in
No.
the pXRF spectrum?
Yeah. In general, the pXRF, its limitations are things that are in the, let's say, down to about 10 ppm or so. So those that we're going to measure in PPT are just not going to show compared with the background.
Okay, thank you.
Any other question? No? Okay. Okay, once more, thank you very much, both the speakers and the participants. Have a nice week and weekend, and we see you in the next colloquium.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ioannis.